let's take a look at a couple problems as we do every week. And before we do, let's discuss how our students are going to obtain this mastery level understanding. If our students can identify a number in more than one way, that's going to assist them in obtaining a mastery level understanding where they can solve the same problem in more than one way. In other words, if you have the number 1, if our students are able to identify the number 1 in a variety of different ways, you'll find that they become more and more comfortable with 1. Let's take a look at what I mean. The number 1 is equal to 1.0. The number 1 is equal to 1.00. The number 1 is equal to 1 over 1. The number 1 is equal to 5 over 5. The number 1 is equal to negative 10 over negative 10. The number 1 is also equal to 1 to the 0 power. We're not really talking about that in our sessions, but that is the case. 1 over 1 is the same thing as 1 to the 0 power. 1 over 1 is also equal to radical 1. All right, so you've got a variety of different ways to say 1. Though the way that I want you to emphasize on is that 1 can be written as a fraction, a numerator equal to a denominator. In other words, 1 over 1 is 1, 2 over 2 is 1, negative 6 over negative 6 over 1 is equal to 1. Any number divided by itself has a value of 1. So let's take a look at a couple problems that we looked at last week, keeping that in mind, that anything over itself is 1. Let's take a look. All right, so let's say last week we had the problem. This is the problem that we did last week. We did 5 1/3 minus 1 7/9. 5 1/3 minus 1 7/9. So what we did is we lined that up vertically. We lined the problem up vertically, and as we have done for the last 7 weeks now, you acknowledge 9 and 3 as the denominators. All right, and 9 is the largest denominator. You ask yourself whether 3 can divide into 9 evenly. And it can. That's why 9 is our least common denominator. Well, 9 times 1 is 9. 9 times 1 is 9. So 7 times 1 is 7. That's where that 7 came from. 3 times 3 is 9. You have to multiply the 1 by 3 to get 3. And what you now have is you have 5 3/9 over 1 7/9. We have graduated the level of difficulty of these problems, and that though we have a common denominator, the numerator in the top fraction is actually smaller than the numerator in the in the bottom fraction. So what happens is you can't perform that operation. You end up with a negative number. So you have to have another way of writing 5 3/9. You have to have another way of writing 5 3/9. And this is where sometimes students have issues writing 5 3/9 in a different way. Let's do that over here. 5 3/9 can be written, the number 5 can be written as 4 plus 1. 4 plus 1 is 5. But we want to rewrite 5 3/9. 4 plus 1 is 5 plus 3/9. 5 3/9 is the same thing as 4 plus 1 plus 3/9. That's a 9. Well, another way to say 1, another way to rewrite this is 4 plus 1 plus 3/9. 4 plus 1 plus 3/9. We've already acknowledged that another way to say 1 is 9 over 9. Now, why did we choose 9 over 9 and not 3 over 3 or 2 over 2? Because we're adding this 9 over 9 to a fraction that already has a denominator of 9. So now what you have is you have 4 plus 12/9, and 4 plus 12/9 is the same thing as 4 and 12/9. That's where this came from. So another way to say 5 1/3, another way to say 5 3/9, another way to say these fractions is 4 and 12/9. And now what you have is you have 4 and 12/9 minus 1 and 7/9, and you end up with 4 minus 1 is 3, 12 minus 7 is 5. Final answer. Final answer. All right, so this is, if you call in, this is a live call-in interactive show. You got to call in if you have questions on what we just did. Number 312-738-1060. Let's attempt to obtain mastery level understanding. Solve the same problem in a different way. All right, so let's take a quick look. We did this last week. Another way to say 5 1/3 is 16/3. You can multiply 3 times 5 is 15 plus 1 to get to 16. And then here, another way to say 1 7/9 is a common denominator 9. 9 times 1 is 9 plus 7 is 16. So again, you're obtaining a mastery level understanding. One way we acknowledge 5 1/3 was 4 12/9. Another way of writing 5 1/3 is 16/3. All right, so what we have is we have 16/3 minus 16/9. Let's multiply by 1. If you multiply by 1, you multiply 9 times 16/3. 9 times 16/3, the 3 cancels with the 9. That becomes a 3, and you end up with 3 times 16, which is 48. If you multiply the 9 times the 16 over 9, the 9's cancel, and you're left with this 16. You end up with 48 minus 16. And then all of this is over 1. So you multiply 9 times 1, you get the 9. And then you end up with 48 minus 16, which is 32. The 9 you bring over. And then 9 divides into 32 3 times. And if you divide 9 into 32, you get 3, but the remainder is 5. So that's how you end up with the same answer. Mastery level understanding. So this is the kind of problem that we want you to be able to do. So you have 2 1/3 minus 3/4. All right, so we need a common denominator. So you have to increment the 4. You have to be able to count by 4s. You go from 4 to 8. And you ask yourself, can 8 go into 4? And it can't. You cannot multiply 3 by anything to get 8. So you count by 4s. You go from 4 to 8 to 12. Can 3 divide into 12 evenly? And yes, it can. That is why 12 is your least common denominator. We've emphasized that every week that we've had the show. All right, so 3 times what gives you the 12? 4. 3 times 4 gives you the 12, and that's why you have to multiply this 1 by 4 to get 4. 4 times what gives you 12? 3. And you have to multiply 3 by 3 to get 9. So look what you have. You have 4 twelfths minus, that's a 4, 4 twelfths minus 9 twelfths. Again, you have a situation where the numerator in the top fraction is smaller than the numerator in the bottom fraction. You can't perform that operation. You must have a way, you must have another way of writing 2 4 twelfths. Let's do that. Let's do that up here. You have to have another way of writing 2 4 twelfths. Well, another way to say 2 is 1 plus 1. That's 2. 1 plus 1 is 2. So you have 1 plus 1 plus 4 twelfths. We're trying to rewrite 2 4 twelfths. Well, another way to say 2 is 1 plus 1, and then you have the 4 twelfths. Well, another way to say 1 plus 1 is 1 plus 1. We've acknowledged that 12 over 12 is the same value as 1. And then we have plus 4 twelfths. Now, the question that you should ask is, why did I choose 12 over 12? Why didn't I choose 3 over 3 or 4 over 4 or 9 over 9? Well, hopefully you can see that we've got a denominator of 12 that the fraction 4 twelfths had a denominator of 12. And we've acknowledged since the first week that you have to in order to add fractions, you must have a common denominator. It would have been meaningless for me to say 3 over 3 when the denominator over here was 12. We need a denominator of 12. So to simplify this, we end up with 1 plus 16 over 12, which simplifies to 1 16 twelfths. So another way to say 2 4 twelfths is 1 16 twelfths. And we'll subtract 9 twelfths, and what you end up with is 1 minus 0 is 1, and you end up with 16 minus 9, which is 7 twelfths. Final answer. 2 1/3 minus 3/4. If you want to have a mastery level understanding, you have to have another way of writing 2 1/3. Well, you can multiply 2 times the 3 to get 6. You add the 1, and you get 7 thirds. One way to say 2 1/3. Another way to say 2 1/3 was 1 16 twelfths. An entirely different way of saying 2 1/3 is 7 over 3. You multiply the 3 times the 2 to get 6. You add the 1 to get 7, and you keep the same denominator of 3. Minus 3/4. Let's combine these fractions by multiplying by 1. We multiplied by the least common denominator over itself. We acknowledged the least common denominator as 12 in the previous problem. So we multiplied by 12 over 12. All right, that's multiplying by 1. 12 over 12 is 1. So let's multiply 7 thirds times 12. Let's multiply this 12 times the 7 thirds. And if you do that, the 3 cancels with the 4, the 12, and you get 4, and you're left with 28. Because the 3 divides into 12 to get 4, and 4 times 7 is 28. Let's multiply this same 12 times 3/4. Let's multiply 3/4 times 12. The 4 cancels with the 12. 4 divides into 12 3 times. You're left with 3 times 3, which is 9. So you get minus 9 over 12. And you end up with 28 minus 9 is 19 over 12. And you'll notice that 12 divides into 19 one time. The remainder would be 7. And the denominator here would remain 12. 1 7/12.